Hi, I'm Ernabel Demillo. We celebrate the environment and chart our progress on making the world better, from schools and energy to growing green and keeping cool. Science in You starts now. Hi, I'm Ernabel Demillo in the Pine Barrens in southern New Jersey, where behind me they're working to control pesky invaders the size of an uncooked grain of rice. The southern pine beetle is the most destructive forest insect in the southern United States, and it is moving north. Although they are no more than 4 millimeters in length, they have destroyed over 40,000 acres of New Jersey pinelands. In 2001, Bob Williams, a New Jersey forester, discovered the first southern pine beetle in New Jersey's Pine Barrens. The invasive species did not immediately raise any alarms, but in 2010, all that changed.
It just erupted across the landscape. And since then, it's all over and it's killing a lot of trees.
Historically, pine beetle outbreaks have occurred only in the warm southern states, as the insect could not survive the freezing northern temperatures. But milder winters have allowed these beetles to expand their territory northward, placing New Jersey's Pine Barrens squarely in their crosshairs.
I work in the forest every day. I've been working in forests for close to 40 years, and there's no question in my mind things are changing.
The destructive nature of the pine beetle is due in part to its unique life cycle. Looking for a place to lay her eggs, a single female attempts to penetrate the bark of a pine tree. The tree defends itself by secreting a toxic pine pitch, the same stuff we use to make turpentine. As the beetle fights to penetrate the syrupy poison, she releases a pheromone, signaling other beetles to help in the attack. Thousands more join in, overwhelming the tree's defenses. Once in the bark, the beetles chew S-shaped grooves that become nurseries for young larvae, as well as food production systems. This process blocks the flow of nutrients and water, effectively starving the tree to death. Once the dying pine can no longer support the insects, the beetles fly off to attack another tree, threatening to transform this one-of-a-kind ecosystem. Amy Carpati is the staff biologist at the Pinelands Preservation Alliance, an organization whose mission is to protect and preserve the resources of the New Jersey Pinelands.
The Pine Barrens is a place in New Jersey that you would never think exists in New Jersey. Even people who live in New Jersey don't know it exists. In terms of its biological significance, it is home to dozens of rare plant and animal species, some of which only occur here in the New Jersey Pinelands and nowhere else in the globe, which means that if they disappear from here, they're gone from the planet. They're just extinct.
Still, from Amy's point of view, protecting the forest's rare plants and animals does not mean eradicating one species in favor of another.
I think traditionally, the term preservation has meant keeping things as they are, not allowing them to change. But if you study ecology, nothing is the same for very long. Things change all the time. And with the beetle, it's been in New Jersey before. We're just going to have to accept that it's in the landscape, and we're going to have to use fire and forestry and just deal with it, I think.
Active forest management and controlled fires are both proven methods for controlling beetle populations. Ron Corkery is with the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection, and today they are using a forest strategy called cut and leave to reduce beetle outbreaks.
Our whole goal is to try to get the tree down. It disorients the beetle in such a way that doesn't enable it to continue to fly and create additional damage.
For Bob Williams, who works with private forest owners, selective tree harvesting and the controlled use of fire is the most effective approach to limiting pine beetle populations. So what's going on here now?
Here, this forest received a commercial thinning about 5 years ago, and then we reintroduced fire into the understory. We've burned it twice, and it's ready to be burned again. It keeps the pine beetles away to a degree. The individual trees grow much healthier. They're more vigorous. So when an insect attacks them, the tree has the ability to fight off things. The other thing it does is when they're emitting pheromones, make a pheromone cloud, the open canopy allows that to disperse, and the beetles will get disoriented. They can't really roll across the land. So thinning really is a major tool in preventing them.
And what about the record-setting low temperatures this winter? Will the harsh cold have been enough to stop future southern pine beetle outbreaks?
We know that we need -7 to -8 degrees for an extended period of time to have any impact on the beetle. We haven't really had those temperatures here at this point. We're hoping that it has some impact. I don't know if it's winning. We're just trying to control at this point because we know we'll never eradicate it.
While it might seem scary that the southern pine beetle is here to stay, scientists and foresters agree that pine beetles, in modest doses, have a positive ecological role to play. The challenge is for humans to understand that we are part of the forest and that we have to find the proper balance. I'm Ernabel Demillo for Science and You.
When Henry Hudson explored New York State's longest river in 1609, the Native Americans referred to it as Mehicanituck, which means water that flows two ways. Today, the health of the river and its animal population seems to be flowing in two directions as well. Water quality is improving after decades of neglect, which means the river is returning to a more pristine condition for the animals that have called the Hudson home for centuries. But not all of the inhabitants here are welcome. Today, the Hudson finds itself under siege by two invasive species, animals from other ecosystems that don't belong here.
Nearly everything that we measure in the Hudson River changed when zebra mussels arrived. Zebra mussels came into the river. They were first seen in 1991. By 1992, there were about 500 billion zebra mussels in the Hudson.
The problem with these tiny bivalves is that they don't belong here. They're native to the lakes in the southern part of Russia. Even though they're small, typically the size of a fingernail and growing up to 2 inches, they're large in number and have a huge appetite. That voracious diet has had harmful effects on the Hudson.
We saw about an 80% loss of phytoplankton populations. And the smaller zooplankton, the little tiny guys, fell by about 90%. And overall, the amount of zooplankton in the river fell by half. And that's interesting because that's fish food, right? So we reckon that about half of the fish food in the river disappeared when zebra mussels came in. So in fact, the bulk of the Hudson's fish community suffered as a result of the zebra mussel invasion.
Research being done at the Carey Institute in Millbrook, New York, shows the tide may be turning on zebra mussels. The mussels are not growing as large as they used to. Since the smaller mussels are unable to eat the zooplankton in water, the amount of fish food in the river has gone back to normal. While the river has survived the zebra mussel attacking by water, it's facing another assault by land and by air. The emerald ash borer is a tiny green beetle that hitched a ride from Asia on boats transporting wood products. It first landed in Canada and then came to the U.S. through Michigan. Now the beetle's offspring are killing trees along the Hudson River, eating them from the inside out. New Yorkers in any part of the state are urged to immediately report sightings of emerald ash borer to the DEC. Across New York State, sticky traps similar to these are being set to detect and eliminate it. Other regions invaded by emerald ash borer are taking more aggressive steps to get rid of the problem. In Canada, wildlife managers are using live fungus in a vertical hanging trap to infect and hopefully eliminate the enemy.
A beetle is trapped into a live trap. It passes through the trap, picks up a dose of the fungus, and then flies off. And the fungus that it's picked up is lethal to that beetle, but we're also hoping it will transmit that fungus to its mates or other members of the species that are chewing on the leaf surfaces, and maybe even transmit that to their eggs when they lay eggs and affect the next generation as well.
New York State's Department of Environmental Conservation says the beetles are making their way across the state on firewood transports and urges fire burners to buy and burn firewood locally. While the state continues to do battle with invasive species in an ever-changing ecosystem, the river is in the midst of recovering from decades of water contamination. In order to support animal life, an ecosystem has to have suitable habitat space, and in the case of a river, that means clean water.
We've got an environmental success story here in New York. If you look at the 30-year history, water quality has improved tremendously.
When it comes to water quality, the Hudson is a river on the rebound with room for continued improvement. So says Dr. Greg O'Mullen, an assistant professor of microbiology at Queens College. His research focuses on the river's microbes, which are microscopic single-cell organisms that can be detected using fluorescent light. Some microbes can be hazardous to human and animal health and even become resistant to antibiotics. In the case of the Hudson River, those harmful microbes come from a most unsanitary source.
Microbes are difficult to see. Sometimes you can smell odors that are associated with those kind of inputs, but in other places, some of the most contaminated locations that we've sampled are actually quaint little brooks that you would think, oh, that must be clean. But it's difficult. You need data to actually make those decisions.
And in May 2013, a series of laws went into effect that require public water treatment facilities to notify the State Department of Environmental Conservation within 2 hours of any discharge of partially treated or untreated sewage. Previously, the notification only needed to happen if the discharge occurred near a public source of drinking water, a bathing beach, or shellfish beds. The DEC posts these reports online at its website. Professor O'Mullen's study also revealed that microbes in the water can become airborne, which means even if you stay out of the water, you may not be able to avoid those microbes altogether. Another source of pollution that has contaminated the Hudson are a group of chemicals called polychlorinated biphenyls, better known as PCBs. General Electric started using PCBs in its manufacturing process in 1947, and according to government estimates, dumped 1.3 million pounds of PCBs into the river over the course of about 30 years.
PCBs are a highly toxic chemical. They've been identified by EPA as a probable cause of cancer in humans, and they've also been linked to illnesses such as thyroid disease, immune disorders, reproductive disorders, low IQ, and other adverse health effects on humans. 25
years after declaring the Hudson a Superfund site, a massive dredging project began in 2009 to reduce toxicity in the river. But the fish population is still suffering.
You can catch them and you can release them, but you can't keep the fish, nor can you eat any of the fish that you have, due to the PCB contamination right now. One of the objectives of the dredging is to get those fish levels down to the point where you can start eating the fish again.
For as long as humans have inhabited New York, we've relied on the Hudson River, but the river hasn't always been able to rely on us. Even in the face of new challenges, the general health of the Hudson is headed in the right direction, preserving an icon of New York State for generations to come. For CUNY TV, I'm Andrew Falzone.
I'm Dr. Max Gomez. This tangle of wires and pipes and magnets looks a little like a Rube Goldberg contraption. But actually, scientists here at the Princeton Plasma Physics Laboratory are trying to create a star in a bottle. It's fusion, and it holds a promise of unlimited energy for the future. It literally is trying to make a star in a bottle, recreating the same reaction that powers the sun right here on Earth. Fusion is a nuclear reaction, but one that's very different from the kind that drives present-day nuclear power plants. All those are fission plants. They unleash energy by splitting atoms, usually an isotope of uranium or some other very heavy element. Fusion is what it sounds like, combining atoms to release energy.
The idea is to take very light elements and you fuse them together, and when you do that, you wind up losing a small amount of mass. And that small amount of mass gets converted to energy.
The amount of energy released is massive. After all, it powers the sun and every star in the universe. The heat generates steam, which spins a turbine that turns a generator that makes electricity. But there's a catch. Turns out atoms don't like to come together or fuse. Their nuclei have a positive charge. It means they repel each other, sort of like the same poles of magnets repel each other.
So you have to overcome this electrostatic repulsion with a force that's greater. The sun does this by this tremendous mass, and the mass gives this gravitational force which can overcome this electrostatic repulsion.
In other words, the sun is so massive that its gravity drives the atoms together with enough force to fuse. On Earth, though, we have to use a different method. There are high-powered lasers that compress a tiny pellet of fuel, forcing the atoms to fuse. Then there's a method the Princeton lab and a huge reactor in the south of France are working on. That approach uses heat to get the atoms moving fast enough to slam into each other with enough force to fuse, which presents a problem.
The temperature of the core of the sun is about 10 million or so degrees. In order for fusion to occur on Earth, we need to get to about 10 times that temperature.
100 million degrees.
About 100 million plus degrees to make fusion work.
At those kinds of temperatures, matter doesn't exist as a solid, liquid, or even gas. It's something called plasma, basically a cloud of ionized particles flying around. The challenge is how to get the fusion fuel that hot.
Multiple ways of heating the plasma. Actually, the first way of heating the plasma is that we drive current in it.
Principal research physicist Dr. Stefan Gerhardt showed me around the Princeton fusion reactor, currently undergoing a $100 million upgrade. He explained that electrical current can only go so far in heating the plasma. There's also 6 million watts of microwave power and 12 million watt beams of deuterium, a type of heavy hydrogen. But there's no material on Earth that can contain something at 100 million degrees, so the fusion reactor holds the hot plasma floating in a super powerful magnetic field. So with all these immense challenges, why are scientists so excited about the potential of fusion power? It's because the fuel in a fusion reactor is deuterium and tritium, types of heavy hydrogen found in and made from seawater.
It's essentially limitless. If there's anything limitless on Earth, I would say the ocean is limitless. It's safe, it's clean. The only byproducts are helium, which again is just a gas that's natural and it's used, by people all over the world.
Plus, fusion doesn't emit any greenhouse gases that contribute to global warming. And because anything that even slightly cools the plasma or stops feeding it fuel stops the reaction, there's no chance of a Fukushima-type meltdown. And the nuclear waste produced is almost zero. Dr. Cohen says we know the science behind fusion. In fact, fusion reactions have already been produced on Earth for fractions of a second. The challenges now are primarily engineering. So what's the holdup? Money.
Say $2 billion per year, which is a relatively small percentage of both the federal budget as well as the amount that's spent on energy. We could make tremendous progress because we'd be able to build the facilities that we need to test these ideas out. The ideas exist, but we need the facilities to test and prove them.
The Princeton fusion reactor will start those experiments in the fall. The much larger international reactor in France is due to come online in late 2020.
If, and more likely when, fusion energy becomes a reality, it'll have an amazing impact, not just on the way we generate electricity, but also on global warming and climate change. And then, when we no longer have to import foreign oil, you can only imagine the impact on geopolitics. I'm Dr. Max Gomez for Science and You.
I'm Donna Hanover. One of the most important steps toward protecting the environment is the development of new battery technology on a large scale. This lab in New York is where some of the most significant research takes place. Professor Sanjoy Banerjee heads up the City University of New York Energy Institute, located in the engineering building at City College.
One of the key issues today is how to store renewable energy so that it's available on demand rather than when the sun shines or the wind blows. Batteries were what we started to look at. Very different batteries now because they have to be large, they have to be able to store a lot of energy, and unlike your little flashlight battery, these are fairly massive systems.
You probably know from having to charge your cell phone that batteries don't create energy, they store it. Then when you need the power, there's a trigger for a chemical reaction in the battery that releases the energy. Scientists use the term cycle for each time a rechargeable battery releases energy and then stores more.
Imagine that you needed to cycle the battery every day. And if you had it coupled to your wind source or your solar source or your solar panel, you'd like it to last 10 years perhaps, right? As long as your panel lasts 15 years. One of the things we aimed at was to make a really long life battery, which would be able to cycle many thousands of times without dying. We call those immortal batteries, or trying to be immortal.
What is the battery that you're working on that is most attractive for all this vision?
Well, I think the zinc manganese dioxide is the most attractive battery because it's a very, very low cost. It's completely environmentally benign and recyclable.
Researchers like Jerome Feynman have built many batteries of all sizes to carry out experiments.
So this is our cathode, which is manganese dioxide. It's it's a very abundant material, it's a cheap material. And so we basically create a sandwich that's zinc with manganese, and that way we have zinc as close to as much manganese as possible, and it helps improve the performance of the batteries.
These are called testers or cyclers. They allow the batteries to be charged and discharged many, many times rapidly. So
you don't have to wait over time.
We don't have to wait for 10 years.
Right.
We can put 10 years of testing through these machines. We are trying to understand how to improve their performance by maybe making their porosity different, their wetting properties different, all sorts of details related to these electrodes to improve their performance from about 3,000 cycles to about 5,000.
With funding from the Department of Energy, Professor Banerjee has worked on a major problem, dendrites. As recharging happens, instead of depositing evenly, the chemicals form coral-like structures. If the structures reach the other electrode, that can short the battery out and kill it.
We did many things to try to solve that problem. One of these was that these dendritic structures grow more easily in stagnant fluid. So one of the ways we handled this was to, it seems obvious now, to stir the fluid a little bit by giving it a little bit of flow. You can see there's flow going through, and we are testing things like how the flow affects the performance of these batteries. We've also used another way of structuring the electrodes so the dendrites don't grow outward, but they grow inwards. So lots of things, the innovations.
Very recently, a company called Urban Electric Power was created about 10 blocks away to commercialize this research and to do quality control when production begins.
We're developing batteries for grid storage applications. They're larger batteries. They're designed to power houses, facilities, give backup power in areas where power goes out frequently. It's very environmentally friendly because everything that goes into our batteries is safe. We're trying to get it out on the market for under $100 a kilowatt hour. That's probably half the price of a lead acid battery currently. And it actually has a longer cycle life than an equivalent lead acid cell.
So this is pretty groundbreaking.
Yeah, it actually is. It's very groundbreaking.
A prototype system has been running for more than a year in the basement of the City College Engineering Building. And recently, the next generation was installed. And they've been saving the building thousands of dollars a month in energy costs.
One of the things we're talking about for New York City is to have deployable energy storage in batteries, which can be then brought to whatever region if you're affected by something like Superstorm Sandy, and supply power locally to some essential services like hospitals or whatever is needed.
On a large scale, battery systems could even back up the grid and prevent devastating surges if part of it is attacked or fails. Meanwhile, the plan is that batteries will give homeowners, businesses, and cities the option of using more of the energy sources like wind and sun that are intermittent but plentiful. That's an application of basic science that's pretty powerful. I'm Donna Hanover for Science and You.
I'm Carol Ann Riddell. Reading, math, and the environment. Welcome to Growing Up Green Charter School. From composting to recycling, students here are learning the ABCs of caring for our planet. These first graders know a lot about composting, from nitty-gritty detail to why worms matter in our world.
The worms, okay, so we have to give them food so they can eat the food, and then they poop out the soil to make to make nature. Like it's nature's process.
Composting is good to the plants and flowers and other stuff and butterflies. They like the summer, they don't like winter because it's cold and they don't like winter.
Dirt and worms are just another part of the learning curve at Growing Up Green Charter School in Queens. Understanding our environmental footprint is an everyday experience here. Not a project, not a special event, but what educators call a mindset.
We talk a lot more about the why behind a lot of things. So when students are eating their snack, we talk about where their snack is coming from, all the people that had to work to bring them that snack, the plants that were involved, the farmers that were involved. So we really talk about all the backstory behind things. So we try to make students understand the importance of everything they have.
The lessons on going green are everywhere in the building. Light switches come with reminders, and recycling is a passion, even in kindergarten.
Why do you recycle? To keep the earth clean.
Just about everything that can be reused here is.
We have a room upstairs, we call it the green room, and families bring in anything from home that could be reused in the classroom. So paper towel rolls, toilet paper rolls, the tops of different bottles. For math, one thing that a lot of kindergarten and first grade teachers do is just have a lot of counters in their room. And typically that's something that a teacher would go and buy from the teacher supply store, but instead we have teachers using old buttons or old bottle caps or things from the green room that families have brought in, so students see that everything around us can be a resource.
What does that mean about how much salt is dissolved in the water?
The goal is to give students a larger context for what they're learning, one that goes beyond what's on next week's test.
Right now in my class we're studying about like different types of water and how the water gets polluted, and like we can't drink it, so can't other animals, and if other animals don't drink it and they'll die, and then the life cycle could die out.
Unburdened by grown-up cynicism, these children believe small actions like recycling a piece of paper will add up to big differences for the planet. So they soldier on, a tiny army of environmental crusaders.
They don't see what they're doing as something little. Every time they're recycling or they're reusing something or they're planting something in the garden, it's the whole world to them. They have all the hope in the world, and it's amazing to watch.
And can make a difference.
And can make a huge difference.
The earth must not be sick.
The hope is that by starting now, these children will grow up to be environmentally conscious adults who see green choices not just as options, but instead as a way of life. I'm Carol Ann Riddell for Science and You.
That's our show for now. I'm Ernabel Demillo. We'll see you next time on Science and You.